Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss continuous diagnostics and mitigation and to secure cyberspace with government and industry leaders. With me today on the show are Kevin Cox, the CDM program manager at DHS, Turk, the acting Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Commerce, Carlene Ileto, the Executive Director for Product and Service Delivery Management Office at U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Jeff Kidwell, the AVP for Vertical Markets at SailPoint, and Chris Townsend, the VP for Sales and Operations at Federal Symantec. We're going to talk about CDM, guys. Big program. We've been hearing about it for years now. It's been in the news, and I know we're making progress. I hear we're moving into new phases, all kinds of things happening. Let's start with Kevin Cox, who's the program manager there. Kevin, tell us about the progress you see being made in CDM to improve security of government operations in cyberspace.
Sure. So just good afternoon first, Jim. Just to provide some context, the CDM program's aim is to work with the agencies to help them get visibility on their networks and on their endpoints. And we have been working two phases. The first phase was to understand what was on the network, making sure that those different devices are secure, patched properly, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And the second phase is to look at who's on the network, understanding who has credentials to the network, as well as who has privileged access. Both of those phases are being worked this year and on into next. This is a critical year for the program. We will be rolling out our dashboard where that data from the two phases will feed in both at the agency level as well as summarized up to the federal level. And we expect to see significant progress in terms of the complete rollout of the solutions out at the agencies in both phases.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Sounds great. Rod, wearing the hat of Chief Information Security Officer, now acting CIO, I guess you've got a good perspective of one of the larger agencies, Commerce, that's been using the program. Can you give us some ideas of progress you see over at Department of Commerce?
Well, I'm really excited about the CDM program, and we think that it's going to be one of the centerpieces for the Department of Commerce's cybersecurity, our portfolio of tools. We right now are in the middle of our pilot phase. For phase one, we expect to have that completed by the end of this calendar year. We are working on our authority to operate. We're working on some cleanup activities with some of our high-rated systems that we have to deal with, which included the rating of a high-rating FISMA system in our endpoint manager, which is kind of interesting. So in order for us to put the data from high systems into our central repository, that system also has to be rated high. So that has caused us to make some improvements over and above the CDM program, but it also is the right thing to do from a security perspective. I'm expecting great things once we get the pilot completed and we roll out the program to include the incorporation of the dashboard that Kevin just mentioned. In addition to that, as part of the CDM program, that's phase one. We're looking at right now at phase two, so we've got phase one and phase two moving in parallel. We have DHS contractors at the Department of Commerce now doing interviews for the credentialing and access management portion, and we expect that that's going to greatly enhance our ability, like Kevin said, to know who is in our network and what they're doing.
Yeah, cool.
So.
It's something about the CDM program. I think that's a good model is, agencies helping other agencies. I mean, that's a good model in government, in the past, everyone's working in silos by themselves. This program is one sort of like, since it's government-wide, it's got people sort of like rallying to collaborate and work with one another. Carlene Ileto at DHS. Now tell us your role. Are you more focused on the DHS networks themselves?
Most definitely. And we have done a fabulous job in trying to make sure that we implement and deploy CDM. Right now, you know how large DHS is.
Yeah, it's a big place.
Fairly large. And of course, we can't just go out and just deploy everything at one time. So
Right.
we're doing an incremental deployment where we have about 4 waves. And in those waves, we have 3 to 4 components. Right now, I can honestly say, and I'm very proud to say, that we have deployed CDM for our pilot LAN A and for Flyzik and ICE. So we
Okay.
chose a small component and then we chose a large component. It's absolutely wonderful. And at that point, we started working on our dashboard. So now we can see the live data on our dashboard. And we're actually going to provide a demonstration for Chip,
Yeah.
our acting undersecretary for management, in the early part of next week. And we're really excited about this because this will then share with him exactly what's on the network, things that we thought we didn't have that
Right.
we actually do have, and actually some of our vulnerabilities. So this is exciting. Now, having delivered the wave 1, which, as I said, LAN A, ICE, and Flyzik, we still have 9 other components that we have to bring on board. So as we go through this, we have 3 more waves to bring on or to deploy. And they will have all of our big components as well as some of our small components as well. And we're really excited about this because as we start to populate the dashboard, we're seeing more data because, remember, this is going to be provided every 72 hours. So this is real time for us. Things that we didn't do before, we're now, or it took us a long time to do, we're now going to be able to see it on the dashboard within 72 hours.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I would think, DHS with Kevin having the government-wide perspective and then DHS having the responsibility within the department itself, it would be one that you really want to make a great success story out of, and it sounds like you're on your way to doing that. Chris Townsend over at Symantec, how's Symantec play in this, and how are you supporting your customer base working these issues?
Yeah, Jim, from a vendor perspective, tremendous progress with the CDM deployment. What we're hearing from our customers really is with the challenges they're facing today in security, they'd like to see the CDM program move even more quickly and get more of the tools deployed because they're seeing such benefit. But overall, if you look at the standardization that's being driven, and as you mentioned earlier, the collaboration that this is causing between industry and government, it's solving a lot of security problems. Folks see the value in it moving forward, and overall, it's raised the security posture of the federal agencies significantly, and it will continue to do that as it gets deployed.
Yeah, I know it's, in a way, it's disappointing that it takes like major breaches to create the priorities that we have, but clearly cybersecurity right now is a major priority for right on up to the top of the administration and government and across the board. So it's incumbent, I think, now, for years trying to get it up onto the front burner. It's on the front burner now and need to deliver. Jeff Kidwell, SailPoint, I understand SailPoint's involved looking at more the phase 2 kinds of activities that are going on around CDM. Can you tell us how SailPoint plays into this picture?
Sure, absolutely. So we saw significant progress in phase 2. In fact, SailPoint is part of all 3 task orders that were awarded in phase 2. Those task orders are 2F, PRIV, and CRED, and we're part of the solution on all 3 different task orders. So currently, the primes are executing on those task orders. What they've done mostly is doing a lot of analysis and understanding where the government is in terms of readiness and in terms of what their current state is. And then they've taken a measurement of what is it going to take to get to the desired state. And they're actually now beginning to execute on those task orders. Most recently, they actually started doing the phase 1 deployment for the agencies that are part of phase 1.
Okay, cool. Very cool. We'll drill down on that a little bit here as we move along. Let's talk about what our listeners like to hear about is, can you cite a specific program or something where you can point to something and say, now here's something that this program, this CDM program, will really make a difference and really help improve security posture or help move the government forward. Let's start with Rod Turk this time at Commerce. Rod, if I asked you to point to a program you're aware of and one that you think where CDM really is going to make a difference or is making a difference, what would come to mind?
Well, there's a couple things I think that I'd like to point out. First of all, our Enterprise Security Operations Center is in Fairmont, West Virginia. Mm-hmm. It is co-located with the NOAA Security Operations Center, and that's on purpose because NOAA is a very, very large portion of the Department of Commerce, right, percentage-wise.
And they deal with a lot of data.
They deal with a lot of data, a lot of diverse data. I mean, commerce itself is pretty diverse when you actually take a look at it. But the benefit here, though, is the CDM program is going to be one of the major feeds into our Security Operations Center so that we can then use our Security Operations Center to process the data, to run it through our SIM tools, to be able to make a better picture of where we are at cybersecurity-wise. One of the things as we look to the future and we look at things that we can enhance our Security Operations Center operations, if you will, is that the CDM program is going to drive a lot of data, a lot of diverse data. Asset management, software asset management, vulnerability information. The real key then is once that information is brought into the environment, into our Security Operations Center, then we need to be prepared to be able to use that data and find the nuggets of truth within that data that can help us with our security operations. Yeah. And there's lots of different ways to do that. There are some innovative ways that I've been associated with when I was at the Department of Energy that might better help us to bake that cake a little bit so that we can provide that value to our customers.
Like analytical tools?
Analytical
like
tools.
To help you find the proverbial needle in the needle.
A needle,
in
yeah.
a stack of needles.
Well, yeah, exactly. The silver needle in a stack of other needles is kind of the way I like to put it. And that's what we're going to be looking at. We're not quite there yet. But as the CDM program matures in the Department of Commerce, we're going to be looking at that data, shredding that data, normalizing it so that like kinds of data is presented so that we don't have a problem with the nomenclature of different things that's presented back into the database. And we expect that once that comes to pass, we'll be able to have some very powerful information that can help us better manage our security operations.
It's interesting about that nomenclature because we talked about on a number of programs like information sharing and things like that, just harmonizing the data and have everybody understanding how the nomenclature, to use your words, is for what data really means and so forth. There's a major challenge. Carlene, how about at DHS headquarters in the CIO office there? How do you, if I asked you to point out a program that you think is one that is going to benefit from the CDM program, something come to mind?
I would say that, as far as DHS, we have 22 components, 12 large ones. And I would have to say that looking at CDM today and knowing that we're going to be implementing a lot, or we're going to be pulling in a lot of data, as Rod has stated, it's going to be critical for us to make sure that we normalize that data, make sure that we display that data on the dashboard to a point where we understand exactly what it's telling us. And one of the things that we have identified so far, because I have to say it's not really a program, but it's a component. It's all the components that are going to benefit from CDM. And as Rod stated, that data that we are going to capture is going to help us to make decisions a lot quicker, because in the past, we didn't have this stuff real time. We didn't have the data to really help us to do what we needed to do and to act proactively. Instead, we were acting reactively because we were reacting to things that were already happening. Now we're looking at things where we will have that data right in hand. It will be normalized or harmonized to a point where we understand what it is, and we will be able to make solid decisions. And I think this is one of the things that I like about this program is that we will now look at certain things like vulnerabilities well in advance and be able to address it before proactively before it actually happens.
Yeah,
so
like the big breach we had worldwide, it's everyone's trying to catch up reactively, and you want to be in front of that, and so it doesn't happen in the first place.
So you're looking at things that are, you see assets that are on your system right now. Many times when FLETC and ICE, when they were looking at this, they would see these things and then they would find out that, my goodness, we have things on the network that we need to address. We're now identifying vulnerabilities that we hadn't seen before that we need to address. So we're going to be managing our vulnerability state. We're going to be able to manage our assets a lot better, both hardware and software, so that we can make solid decisions.
Excellent, excellent. Two things came to mind there. And I've said this in shows before, but we're actually approaching a world where time to decision is approaching zero. I mean, it's like you need real-time decision making. I mean, cyber attacks happen like that. I mean, it's not like you have hours to prepare. So you need these tools, and the visualization, I think, is another tool that's there. And I quote Albert Einstein, who said, if you can't visualize it, you can't understand it. And so the idea of having the tools to help with that decision making makes a big difference. Kevin Cox, same question. If I said point to something that you think is, you'd say, I'm proud of this one. This is something, a program that's making success, and CDM is going to make a big difference. Does something come to mind?
Sure, yeah. We've seen a number of examples across all of the different agencies as they've deployed the tools. To Carlene's point, they get visibility immediately into the cyber hygiene of their network, and that allows them to go ahead and get things patched, improve the overall security posture. One of the things I want to point to is this past weekend with the attacks that you had mentioned, the WannaCry ransomware attacks. We had reached out to a number of agencies that have the agency dashboard deployed, and we were able to successfully run reports in some of those agencies that had a little more maturity in terms of the data feed into the agency dashboard, and get a sense of whether those endpoints reporting up to the dashboard were vulnerable. So that's a good first example of what you pointed out, that ability to not only get the data and get the picture, but be able to respond quickly. That zero time decision making. You've got to respond immediately. And that really points to where we're headed with this, is that each agency will have that visibility, but at the end of the day, we want to get that visibility at the federal level as well, just so that the federal leadership can see where they need to put resources and work with the agencies to help address particular vulnerabilities.
Sure, and I guess the tools give you the ability to do that. I want to hear from our industry folks on this question too, but let's just convenient place here maybe to make a quick break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Kevin Cox from DHS, Rod Turk from Commerce, Carlene Ileto from DHS, Jeff Kidwell from SailPoint, and Chris Townsend from Symantec Federal. We're talking continuous diagnostics and mitigation. We were talking about specific programs that we think are going to make a difference because of the efforts being made. We heard from our government guest. Let's turn to our industry panelists. Let's go to Jeff Kidwell. Jeff, what's a program that you would look at? And if I asked you to say, here's one that I think really will potentially make a difference because of having this attention and security on it.
Yeah, so Jim, phase 2 is in the process of making a difference. It's definitely going to make a difference. Phase 2 is all about identity. Right? So that phase is deploying a set of technologies as well as integration and implementation services to help solve the identity problem, or who are the users on the network.
Correct.
It's focused on 4 functional areas.
Okay.
Right. Trust. Do we trust this person? Is this a user that we want to let into our house and onto our network? Cred. How do we authenticate this person? Right. Are they accessing the network using a PIV card? behave? Do they have the appropriate behavior? Are they up to date on their cybersecurity training? Is this a classified program? And if so, are they cleared? And the last functional area, that of priv, right? What privileges do they have, right? What are their entitlements? So the phase 2 is all focused about the identity or the users on the network and governing those users, right? Making sure that they have the appropriate training, they've authenticated the appropriate behavior to get access to the different systems, and then governing that, right? So it actually, the program builds an identity warehouse, or what the program refers to as a master user record. And in that master user record is a lot of data attributes of that specific identity, and it enables any given agency to now begin to govern those identities or those users and what they're accessing, and should they be accessing those systems.
I totally agree, Jeff, and there's, when it comes to identity management, I've been saying for years, if we can nail that and just get that down, it opens the world to so many other applications. If you can get that identity and trust down, and you're focused on people, but I think identity also, expands in the identification of devices on the network, messages themselves, secure email, things like that. The identification, but the things you're describing there, if we can get that done, I think it just makes so many other applications. It enables them for the future, and things that we haven't even thought of yet will become possible if we can positively get that one nailed down. Chris Townsend, Symantec, if I asked you, Chris, to point to something there, a program that you think is really going to benefit from CDM efforts, what comes to mind?
Two things, Jim. So every one of the leaders I meet within the federal agencies, and really I'm going to echo a lot of what the government panelists hit on, but all the leaders that I've been meeting with over the last 8-9 months have two major challenges. One, they all feel like they have too many tools and a lack of standardization in the environment. And the second is, and we talked about it, the operational complexity, right? All of these tools are providing a tremendous amount of data that's very difficult to parse through, and you end up overwhelming your security analysts to figure out what they really need to focus on. So I think CDM addresses that in a couple ways. First, it drives tool standardization. It fills gaps like the identity management piece, but it also takes a lot of the complexity out of the operational environment, which is one of the biggest challenges, right? Complexity is the enemy of a sound security posture, and not to mention that it's cost inefficient if you have an operationally complex security environment. So CDM addresses those 2 points: drive standardization and takes a lot of complexity out of the operating environment.
Yeah, I know for years heading up the group trying to do some government-wide things and coordinate across government and everything, it's hard. I mean, it's somebody likes WordPerfect, somebody likes Microsoft Word. I mean, you've got it's tough, but to see the collaboration going on, I think it is in and of itself a major move forward for a program such as this that's government-wide. Let's talk about some of the lessons you're learning along the way. Like we like to do on the show is talk a little bit about some of the things you're learning for others that are out there working the same issues, might want to learn from you. Let's start with Carlene this time. Carlene, Ileto, what are some of the lessons you're learning with these CDM initiatives that might help some of your colleagues around town? What are some of the things you experience on a day-to-day basis that you pass on as knowledge you'd pass on to others?
As we understand CDM to be an enterprise service, I think this is one of the best parts about CDM is that you are learning so much, but not only learning about the product itself, but you're learning about your agency and how we deploy, how we deliver, and what we have on our network. And also, starting with the phase 2, who's on our network. So I will tell you, most of the panel here may talk about the technologies, but our challenges are a little bit different, I would say, because I think we have some really good technical folk who can understand their environment, and they can actually fix whatever is needed to make sure that CDM works. Right. The key here is the delivery or the deployment. and understanding the program management practices that need to happen on the business side, ensuring that we have the funding to do this, and making sure that when we are changing the environment, that we baseline what that environment looks like as we start to deploy CDM. It also helps us with communication. One of the things that we have done very, very well is the integration and ensuring the collaboration and coordination of the diversity that we need in order to deploy. So we have Kevin's team working with us from an acquisition perspective, making sure that we deploy CDM. We have our engineers involved so that they understand where we are in that life cycle of service delivery. We understand or have a partnership across the different components. And that communication, we have an executive steering committee that we bring all those folk together so that they can talk to us about where their issues are so that we can resolve them. We also have this executive steering committee reaching out to other departments so that we make sure that whatever they have done, if they're ahead of us, they can share information back so that we can leverage what they've already done and we don't have to reinvent that wheel. It is so important for us to do the communications and the collaboration. And I think with the program management practices, we have managed to really override many of the obstacles that I think we would have encountered had we not.
Excellent. Communicate, communicate, communicate. It's what I just heard from that
Absolutely.
answer. And that's great. I mean, Kevin, what do you think? I heard your name mentioned in that particular discussion about communicate. What are some of the lessons you're learning along the way here as you work through these issues?
Jeff, you hit upon a real key one, is the overall communications, because we're dealing not only with the government community, with Rod and Carlene and the other teams and the agencies, but also with the vendor community, Chris and Jeff and all the other vendors. So communications is certainly key in the way that I view this. While it is a DHS program and we work with GSA to manage the contract, the way I view it is this is really a federal-wide program, and it's about the collaboration, the partnerships, not only with the government community, but also with the vendor community to make it successful. Carlene hit upon a real key point that we've seen across the agencies is while the technology sometimes can be difficult in terms of deployment, overall it's sometimes the easier problem in terms of the overall efforts of the program to get the processes in place and to work through the change control efforts, et cetera. So that's one thing that we've seen across the board is really defining processes, not only across the federal space, but also agency by agency. Right. The other thing we've seen from a program standpoint, and we're taking these lessons learned as we move into the next contracting approach, is we have to recognize that a lot of these issues that we're facing, these problems that we're working to address, they're complex and they don't get solved overnight. It takes time. So we want to make sure with our future contracting approaches that we have enough runway to get in and work with the agencies, work with the vendor community to be successful, rather than trying to solve the problem in 1 week and not get it solved completely. Build in enough time to do it right and get it implemented correctly.
Yeah, I think the thing you said there that really resonates with me is it's a we program. It's not like a DHS mandating you will do this. It's about DHS collaborating with the other agencies. Let's get together and figure out how we can all get it done. I think that's a big difference in terms of a program rolling out. Yeah. Rod, what do you think in terms of lessons learned as you work your way through these the world of CDM implementation?
I think there's two things that I'd like to point out. I think there's an unintended consequence from the CDM program that I think is very, very important.
Okay.
And one of that unintended consequence is that this really is a shared services kind of operation, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have collaborated within the Department of Commerce. We've brought all of our components together, and through that process, I'm sensing a greater level of cooperation and collaboration within the department itself that has led to other kinds of shared services opportunities, and in a certain sense has broken the ice a little bit, so that as CDM progressed through, and through the processes, we now have another shared service, which I mentioned earlier, is our Enterprise Security Operations Center. We've pulled together our security operations centers into more of a unified presentation, which hasn't been unprecedented in the past. And in the, I don't know, 10 years or so that I've been at Commerce, I'm sensing a greater level of collaboration and cooperation amongst the CIOs and the CISOs as we move forward. The other thing is that communication is absolutely important, but I think there's a little different twist to it. So from a CISO standpoint, we've brought many of the CISOs together in collaborative forums to try to tune the tools that we've been given and to make them hum, if you will. So spent 26 years in the Navy, you know, and a lot of time in aircraft carriers. That old maintenance chief out there fixing airplanes, you know, typically had a little black book in his pocket that said, you know, when this happens, I do this,
right,
because that's my experience. It says that this is the problem, this is what I do. And those kind of little tricks, I submit that every systems administrator has those kinds of little tricks on how to make those tools hum. So my goal then is to bring those working groups together for those tools across the federal government, across numbers of CISOs, come to the table and tell us, when this happened, what did you do? How did you use the tool in an innovative way that would give you a little bit more information that would protect your systems? And we did that, especially in the earlier phases of the CDM program with numbers of the agencies around the Beltway. We brought the CISOs together with their technicians and said, okay guys, how are we going to make this work? And it was very, very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in addition to the radio show, as I'm sure you know, we try to do these thought leadership events around chief information security officers, CTOs, whatever, and bring them together just to share knowledge and meet each other, talk to each other, because, you know, as we all know, none of us is as smart as all of us. So you put people in the room, everyone walks out smarter after you have a discussion. Chris Townsend, what do you think? What are some of the lessons learned for you as you work with your customers on these programs?
Yeah, so from the vendor perspective, I'm going to stay in the same theme with communication. I think we've got an opportunity to improve communications ahead of some of the future phases. So, and Kevin mentioned that. How do we start to break down the communication silos between the government, the systems integrator community, the vendor community, and even the silos within the agencies themselves? So we've seen some things where there's been duplication of tools that were procured on the CDM program that were already installed in some of the agencies, and we're trying to figure out whether we maintain the existing tool set or replace it with a tool set that essentially does the same thing. So there was some cost inefficiencies there. So going forward, I think we can address that as we look ahead to future programs to break down those silos of communication and really facilitate better discussion between the integrator community, the vendor community, and the government to avoid those duplication of efforts.
Yeah, what I'm sensing is that it's sort of like fine running machine now. I mean, the early days, what was it? How do we get together? Everyone's got to bond and meet each other, and people don't necessarily trust each other. And you know, who are you? Who are you? And but I'm sensing today that we've come a long way to where it's now a process that's just continually getting better and moving along, and we're on the way. Carlene?
Well, I think that we have learned our lesson on that. Because before we were developing or we were delivering in silos.
Right.
And we found now that it's more beneficial if we bring the right parties together so that we can do it more efficiently, especially cost efficiently and cost effectively. And then we actually are able to deliver timely. And that's really important.
Right. Well said. Very good point. Jeff, what do you think if I asked you a question, what are some of the lessons learned as SailPoint works its way into the world of CDM and you begin rolling out or working on these phase 2 initiatives for identity?
Yeah, so Jim, I think a big lesson that we've learned, or that we see the entire industry seeing, and that is the challenge of securing the network perimeter. Right? The reality today is employees whether it's using their own laptops, their own iPads or tablets, their own smartphones, whether it's inside the network or at home or on business travel, they're accessing the network remotely with all these different devices, right? And it's also business partners. So securing that network perimeter, it's proven to be impossible. I mean, it's permeable at best, right?
And the technology just keeps changing. Whenever you think you've got it, a new technology pops out there, and you're starting over again.
Absolutely, right. So what we're seeing is our customers recognizing this and industry taking a little bit different approach, right? And that different approach is a user-centric approach, right? And it starts with see everything. Right? See everything that's on your network, all the devices, all the applications, all the users. And then govern everything, right? Make sure your devices are up to date with all the different patches. Sure. Do security testing against your applications. Make sure they're not vulnerable. And govern your users. Make sure you're managing what your users have access to. So the reality is hey, security is not an IT problem. It's a business problem. And we need to enable and empower the business to help us solve the problem.
Excellent. Excellent. And now we have like the Internet of Things coming along, which will add a little bit more complexity here. How do we secure my toaster? And how's my smart refrigerator not going to break into my network? But we do a show on Internet of Things, and to me it's a fun one because you can go all over the book. I mean there's so many different places you can go with this, from self-driving cars to the smart toaster, as I mentioned. Let's talk about challenges. I want to talk a little bit about challenges. We've picked up some priorities in terms of what people are already through the discussion. So let's talk about some of the hard things that are yet to be done in order to get where you want to go. Let's start with Kevin again. Kevin, what are some of the real challenges you face day to day in trying to move forward on these programs? Things you feel like you need to overcome to get where you really want to be?
Sure. I'm going to reiterate a point I had made earlier, is once the technology is in place, we really need to continue to mature the processes and as Jeff had mentioned, the business side of this, and really integrate the tools, the dashboard, et cetera, into our day-to-day business processes. So that's certainly a critical piece. The other thing that we want to look at is really what we're doing now is taking the low-hanging fruit away from the adversary, getting these basic processes, basic technologies in place so that the agencies have confidence that their endpoints, their networks are secure. But at the end of the day, what we really want to get to is securing the data. So with the first two phases, understanding what's on the network and who's on the network, that gives us a view of the overall infrastructure and what's happening on a day-to-day basis. We want to continue to mature the program and get to those high-value assets and the data on those systems to make sure that those are secure. So we have a ways to go to really achieve that level of maturity, but we're getting there and working through the challenges to ensure that the sensitive government data is protected.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Rod, Turk, what do you think? What are some of the challenges you face on a day-to-day basis in trying to work your way, try to move these programs forward, get them in place, get them implemented, and get where you want to get?
Well, the biggest challenge I think that I've seen is just speed or lack thereof. I would love to go much more quickly into the CDM program. I'd like to implement more quickly. But with a very diverse organization that we have in the Department of Commerce, we also have to bring all of our CIOs and CISOs along with us, as well as make sure that we're not breaking any of the applications as we move forward with this. And we also want to make sure that we're putting in the proper infrastructure so that once we do go live, that it gives us what we want it to give us and it doesn't hinder any of our other functional requirements. So speed, I think, is an issue. Again, I'd love to go faster, but it's just we are where we are.
Yeah. I want to hear from Carlene and Chris and Jeff on this too, but we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Kevin Cox from DHS, Rod Turk from Commerce, Carlene Ileto from Department of Homeland Security, Jeff Kidwell from SailPoint, and Chris Townsend from Federal Symantec. We're talking continuous diagnostics and mitigation. We've been talking about progress and programs and lessons learned. When we went to break, we were talking challenges. But we haven't heard from Carlene Ileto yet. Carlene, what are some of the challenges that come to mind that you feel like need to be overcome to get to where you really want to be with this?
Okay, so I have to agree with Kevin and Rod. Speed is definitely an issue. It challenges us all in the federal government.
Yeah.
So I do want to say though that programmatic practices are a challenge for us, because if we're delivering anything in the federal government, it's going to have its challenges. That's not a surprise to anybody. But when you look at some of the programmatic practices that we have to do, for example, we have to understand what our budget looks like so that we can move forward in the future years for CDM. We have to understand our stakeholder engagement so that we make sure that we deliver and we deliver timely. We need to make sure that we're effective or that the CDM program is effective across the enterprise, and to understand those risks and issues and be able to address them timely or to mitigate those risks so they don't happen. So, and then of course the change management. We have to be able to document and understand what that baseline looks like. So I would say our programmatic practices are very key and can be challenging with services delivery.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. Chris Townsend, Symantec, what are some of the challenges that come to mind to you that you see you need to help your customers jump through or get through in order to get where they need to be?
A bit of a different perspective, and really focus more on the agility of the CDM program to meet the evolving needs of cybersecurity. So CDM was devised 3 or 4 years ago, and the approach and the tools that are being used were solving the problems of the time, but we're seeing a lot of evolution, obviously, in cybersecurity. One great example is in the cloud, right? Every customer engagement we have, there are 2 primary cloud issues that our customers face. First is, how do we get to secure cloud? How do we move to shared services and do it in a secured fashion? And how does CDM begin to address that going forward? The other problem that we see often is this idea of shadow IT, where there are many cloud applications that are being used, not with malicious intent necessarily, but folks that are trying to get their job done, and they're using cloud applications to do that, which creates a security threat within the environment. Right. And you read the latest Internet Security Threat Report. Most federal agencies think they're using 30 to 40 cloud applications, or have 30 to 40 cloud applications deployed, and we're going in and doing cloud audits and finding that there are 800 or 900 cloud applications that are being used, and some of those are high risk. So how do we start to build in that type of monitoring in the CDM program? Because there's some great capabilities out there to do that, and I think it would align very well with the goals of CDM. So just the flexibility of the program to adopt new technology.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as the new generation of kids enter the workforce, the number of cloud applications that are going to be out there, downloading apps from the cloud is going to be like a day-to-day activity, and it's going to be compound the issues you're bringing up right here. Jeff Kidwell, what do you think are some of the major challenges that you face as you're trying to support your customers and move forward with the phase 2 of CDM?
Yeah, as a technology provider, we see 3 challenges. Okay. And they're all interrelated, right? So DHS has done a great job of leveraging their buying power to buy tools, and not just for phase 2, but phase 1 as well, for all of the government, and push that down. And it's a set of tools and technologies and services. But the tools are only as good as the training. Right? So the training is the first challenge I see, and training out at the individual agency user level. Along that same line, resources, right? So these tools are going to are going to need care and feeding, right, to go on to do their jobs. So there needs to be the appropriate resources at the agency level. And the other thing I would mention, again intertwined, is organizationally or ownership. Right, so the given agencies have to take ownership of the tools. Again, DHS leverage their buying power, and they're providing a phase 1 implementation that's just the beginning of the capabilities of these tools.
Yeah.
So the agencies have to take ownership to do more with the tools to get the value, the total value out of the capabilities of the tools.
Yeah, I think all 3 points are interrelated. I mean, you need to put resources on there. You need to own it. You need to get the resources. You need to have them trained. You can't. It's not like, okay, well, we've implemented phase 1 now, so let's go out and have a beer and say we did it. It's constant vigilance to make sure you have the people that are trained and the resources on it that need to be on it. We've got about 12 minutes or so left in the program. What we like to do on all our programs is kind of like take a higher level look and look to the future, and sort of like ask the question of we're doing these programs obviously because we think they're important to do. So what's it going to mean for us down the road? How will this improve government? How will this improve security for our nation and things like that? So let's put on your future hat and let's start with Jeff and work our way right back down the table here. Jeff, what's this look like down the road? Where's this all going? What's this going to do for us in the future?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer. In a lot of ways, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're at a disadvantage. The Department of Energy released a study, I think it was about 5 years ago, where they proved the genealogy of malware and different hacking tools. Right? So what that basically means is that the hackers start to exploit a vulnerability, and we as an organization or as an industry block it, and then the hackers turn around and just flip a couple of bits.
They morph it, and they just keep morphing it.
And now this malware that was irrelevant is now relevant again,
Yeah,
right? So it's just,
game.
how do we get from...
You fix it, they modify it to get in front of the fix.
How do you get from reactive to proactive, right? So I can tell you that one of the big areas that we as a vendor are investing on is in identity analytics. Mm-hmm. So as I discussed earlier, and what phase 2 is doing is all about identities or users on the network, building that master user record. Right? So we're investing heavily in identity analytics. So through the process of normal use, our customers that are using SailPoint will build a data warehouse of the user activity and the behavior of those users on the network.
Right.
And now we can apply analytics against that user activity to begin to see changes in behavior pattern, anomalies, uniqueness of that of that user, to be able to shift from a reactive state to a proactive state from a user perspective.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I think it's the whole concept of trust. You need to be able to trust your supply chain, your partners, whatever, and have the tools in place that can authenticate and authenticate that when you get a message from A to B, you can trust A is sending you a legitimate message. Chris Townsend, what do you think? What's your crystal ball look like down the road?
Well, really not that far off of what Jeff said. I think we're very much in alignment where we see the future of things going. I think there are 3 things that we need to focus on, because solving cybersecurity is a process. It's not something that all of a sudden we're gonna figure out how to block all cyber threats, right? We need to have an ongoing communication. It starts with collaboration, and again, collaboration between industry and government to make sure that we're sharing best practices and information and beginning to solve these problems. The second is to drive toward a more standardized approach. I think that many cybersecurity environments were built out very reactively. I think, again, our customers are overwhelmed with various tools and components, and we're not well equipped to address this evolving threat of cybersecurity. Our attackers are much more agile than we are. We have to build interoperability. We have to build automation, and that all is derived from automation. And then the third is take a proactive approach. Again, because most of our environments are built up reactively, our cybersecurity environment doesn't necessarily map to our risk mitigation plan, and we need to do a better job of building a cybersecurity architecture from the ground up that's tied to our risk mitigation plan, so then we can tie cyber to the data and tie it to the user identity management to be able to facilitate this increasingly borderless world that we live in, right? And the security policy needs to be consistent, whether the user's accessing data on-prem or in the cloud or for a mobile device or a government-owned device or a personally owned device.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well said. I taught cybersecurity for 18 years at the graduate level on Saturdays, and to date, I still feel like we're putting Band-Aids on problems. You know, something happens, we Band-Aid it, we fix it, and you know, and hearing this proactive, I think cloud and things like that are opportunities to take a holistic approach and to get proactive and to stop fixing things after they break, but get ahead of them and make sure they don't break in the first place. Carlene, what do you think? What's it look like down the road to you? Where's this all going?
My vision for the future of CDM is not only to address the cyber attacks, but also to look at what we have on our network and know it. I mean, truly know it and understand what's on there, but also who's on it and why are they on it. And I think this is going to allow us, really, especially our IT leaders, to make better decisions, make timely decisions. We'll have accurate data, not just data that they think they have, but they will have accurate data that they can look at on the dashboard to help them to make solid and timely decisions. And as a result of that, I really and truly believe that that's going to increase our security posture across the federal government.
I do too. I think you're exactly right. Just knowing what you have is a big thing, because a lot of agencies don't. I mean, I was CIO at Treasury for a long time, and I would have, you know, the intelligence communities come in and every year do, you know, and I would learn things about my network I had no idea were going on, you know, in terms of things that were out there. Rod Turk, what's it look like to you, Rod? What's this? Where's this all going down the road?
I think there's two things that come to mind. I think, first of all, today the CDM program is a wonderful model of how we should be procuring systems, tools. Volume pricing through the BPAs that CDM brings, I think, is a fantastic thing. CDM also brings integration services as well as training, all of those things that you need programmatically to be able to make your program work properly and to progress it to maturity. I think that model is fantastic. In fact, at the Department of Commerce, we have a strategic sourcing group that now is gathering together requirements from all of our components and driving contractual actions that gives us volume pricing across our enterprise within the department. But I think the other thing that I'm looking forward to, and I think CDM is going to be one of the first phases of this, is that in order to get in front of the bad guys, we're going to have speed at the computer level, machine-to-machine kind of communication, where we can identify issues, where the computer identifies them, and then takes the action to be able to protect itself, as well as communicate throughout the network to say, you know, we've seen this in other parts of the federal government, we've seen it here in the Department of Commerce, let's say, and then be able to transition that information out to our components so that we can react at the speed of the machine. We all know that when the malware is introduced into the environment, it tries to move throughout the network, move laterally, and what we want to do is to be able to identify it, stop it, and then be more resilient, so that then we can then stop that exfiltration or stop that movement of that malware, so that the damage that is done is very, very small. And that's done by speed and generally machine-to-machine information. And I think CDM, as it moves forward, I think we're going to see more and more of that machine-to-machine kind of communication,
I think you're right,
that will make us more resilient.
Yeah, and I like that word resilient. I think, you know, there's no kidding ourselves, there's going to be issues, but how quick can we react to them to prevent them from becoming, you know, major issues? Kevin, what's it look like to you down the road? Where's this all going? Why is this program going to make a big difference to all of us down the road in terms of better government and better security for our country?
Sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're looking at now with the budget that was recently passed for FY17. We're going to continue to work with the agencies, with the vendor community, the system integration community, to finish out phases 1 and 2. The budget allows us to start into phase 3, which gets into the boundary, the perimeter, or the lack thereof. So we're going to, what we've been focused on to this point is really the on-prem environments of the agencies. We're going to be able to start looking at how we get data in from the cloud environments, whether it be infrastructure, platform, or software, to get visibility on the government data out in the cloud. Also mobile devices, we want to pull that in. From a process standpoint, we want to get incident response standardization across the federal space. And one of the key objectives of the program originally was to get ongoing assessment and ongoing authorization in place to move away from the three-ring binder compliance approach to security to where we bring a system online, authorize it the first time, and then in an ongoing fashion monitor it thereafter. So that we get that real-time awareness about what's happening on the system. So all of that, with the new budget, we're able to begin all of that activity. The other thing from an acquisition standpoint, our CDM BPAs expire next year in August of 2018. So we're working with GSA to implement our new acquisition approach. We're establishing a special item number on IT Schedule 70, where our CDM approved products list will be. That's going to be set up so that the vendor community, as they have innovative new technologies, can submit those for inclusion on the APL much more easily than we've done in the past. The other part of the acquisition strategy is, rather than compete new BPAs, is we're going to utilize the Alliant government-wide acquisition contract and issue new task orders. Based on the lessons learned, we're going to issue task orders to help the agencies have a vehicle in place for up to 6 years, so that we can do future phases. We can do, as new attacks develop and we need new technologies out in the agencies, we can respond much more quickly. Exactly. And at the end of the day, what we want to get to is a continual maturity of the program, getting ongoing authorization in place, building in the resilience, making sure that the agencies feel comfortable that they have a good understanding about what's happening in their IT environment, and really giving them the awareness of what they need to do in order to successfully manage their environments.
Well said.
So.
Good last words. Let me try to do a very quick summary here. We've been talking CDM with some special guests. We've talked about the two phases. Phase one, in my mind, is what is on the network. Phase two, who is on the network, the identity side. We talked about the various stages and where they are. We talked about the dashboard and visibility into the networks on specific programs. We talked about enterprise security operations centers. We talked about visualization and time to decision. We talked about phase two, focusing on that IDM piece. And lessons learned, we talked about we're learning to collaborate. I heard communicate. I heard shared services are bringing components together and focus on the business process, not just the technology process. Challenges, we heard about standard procedures. We heard about securing the data. Speed was a big issue. Budget was a big issue. Secure in the cloud and the services in the cloud were issues. And training, resources, and ownership came up as challenges. In terms of the future, we talked about identity analytics. Everyone must play. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to know what we have to make better decisions. The model is good. We need resilience, and we need real-time awareness to be able to do what we need to do. With that, I want to thank our panelists for being here and for taking time from their busy schedules. I want to thank our sponsors, without which we don't have a show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Radio. And most importantly, I'd like to thank the listening audience who tunes in and listens to our shows. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.